Hello, and welcome to the Magic of Calvin and Hobbes, a fan celebration. My name is Ryan, and I am a self-proclaimed Calvin and Hobbes superfan and expert.
And my name is also Ryan, although most people call me Indy.
Hello, and welcome to a new episode of the Magic of Calvin and Hobbes. Before we get into today's discussion, I'd like to just give our quick disclaimers that we always make. First of all, we're not associated with Bill Watterson or his syndicate. We don't have the rights to the comics, so as always, we can't show them on our YouTube channel, but we'll have a blog post with this episode that goes over all the comics that we mentioned, where you can find them on gocomics.com. We'll give you the dates, so you can look them up that way if you have a subscription, and we'll give you the books and page numbers if you want to look them up in the books.
And aside from that, as you may have heard if you've listened to some previous episodes, we're going to do a trivia episode coming up soon. Now, our longtime listeners know that we like to ask trivia questions pretty much every episode, but we think we might dedicate maybe a whole bonus episode to just trivia. So if you have trivia questions you'd like to ask one of us, you can send an email to magiccandh@proton.me. And then in your subject line, just put questions for Ryan if you want Ryan to answer the questions, or questions for Indy if you want me to answer the questions. And then whichever one you put, the other one will be the one to look at the email and then compile them.
Exactly. And just if you can get those in by August 31st, if you want to participate, that'll give us enough time to put together an episode. So we're looking forward to that.
Yeah. And just one other thing, make sure it's a question that is, for lack of a better word, about Calvin and Hobbes. So not like, what's the fourth word on page 26 of whatever. That's not really about knowledge of the strip, but things
Right.
that are like just interesting things about a particular strip, or like when did something happen, or anything like that. So, a real trivia question. You probably know what we mean by that.
Yeah. And of course, we'll be the arbiters of what constitutes a fair question. But yeah, I think we all understand what's generally meant here. So
Yes. Yeah. So if you'd like to participate in that, feel free to email us, like Ryan said, by August 31st.
yeah. Okay, before we get going, Indy, we have a couple of emails that
All right.
I want to shout out. So, first one is from Jacob. This is a new emailer. And Jacob says, I am a big fan of your podcast and enjoy all of your Calvin and Hobbes references. I also really enjoy your observation skills, such as noticing the tiger painting above Calvin's bed. There's another painting, too, that looks like a W with an A growing out of it, or sometimes the A sort of looks like a person over a microscope. And so then he describes this is from March 13th of 1987. It's part of the Little Raccoon story arc. And the painting appears above Calvin's bed in the third and fourth panels. And so I looked and I saw it, and I agree, it looks like a W and an A, and I have no idea what it's supposed to be, but it's an interesting observation, an interesting piece of art. So
Oh,
yeah, could be someone at a microscope, or I don't know. You got to take a look and see if it looks like anything to you. But
yeah, that's got me intrigued. You know what? Yeah, let me break out my copy of that book. 1 second. Okay, so we're in Something Under the Bed is Drooling.
yeah,
Okay, yeah, I think I see it now. So this is where Calvin and Hobbes are in bed that evening, and they're talking about how I hope he makes it, and they're not sure.
yeah.
Okay, yeah, then we see a picture over the bed. This does kind of look like a W and an A. I see that. And then this other panel, yeah, I can kind of see where you're getting the microscope from too. It's maybe pareidolia here, but it does kind of look like that.
Yeah.
So,
So
hmm. I wonder if this could still be meant to represent a tiger. It's just since it's dark and there's like a glare on the glass, maybe that's kind of
mm,
a stylized way of showing it.
that could be. I could see that. Yeah. All right. Well, that's a good hypothesis. So, yeah, listeners, if you want to take a look and see if you have any guesses what that might be, let us know. But yeah, interesting catch, Jacob. Jacob also says he's been listening to the episodes in order, so he doesn't know if we've already mentioned this in later episodes. Don't worry, Jacob, you're good. But
We don't know
so
either. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, no, he just listened to the transmogrifier episode and said that if he could transmogrify into something, he would pick a house cat so that he could just laze about and not have to do anything he doesn't want to, except for the occasional flea treatment and checkup and stuff. But I like this idea. He says he would give himself opposable thumbs so that he could still hold books and stuff and have his current intellect so that he could still read as a cat, which I hadn't considered that as a possibility, but I mean, if you can transmogrify into a tiger, why not a cat with opposable thumbs, you know? So,
That's true. And we do know this may have been with the gun rather than the box, but we do see them being transformed in a couple instances into things that aren't normal animals. Like I know at least Hobbes is transformed into some kind of monster at some point, and maybe there's some other cases
yeah.
too. So it seems like even sort of imaginary things would be fair game for this.
And one of them becomes a sentient flower. So, I mean, if you can do that,
And the flower is able to hold the gun too. So
yeah,
yeah, a cat that can hold books with opposable thumbs seems like that should be well within the abilities of the transmogrifier.
yeah, absolutely. So, I think we can go ahead and modify, anyone who wants to is free to modify what they would transmogrify into with whatever they think would be convenient to have in that form. So, you have our permission.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, good thinking, Jacob. And you know what,
Yeah.
on that thought, one kind of story we didn't get, well, at least not really, was like transmogrifier mishaps.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there was the case where I think it was when Calvin was a tiger and Hobbes was supposed to transmogrify him back to the boy and he made him like a giant frog by accident and then he had to do it
Yeah.
again. But we never got like partial transmogrifications. So
Yeah.
maybe that'd be a little too horrific, but something like, the old movie The Fly or something, where it's like, okay.
Right. Yeah.
Although
That's
there
something
was
like
the strip where Calvin did have a fly head or something.
yeah, he's kind of an anthropomorphic fly, sort of. So
Yeah.
yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't think that's associated with the transmogrifier, but
No, he's just imagining it. But yeah, uh, as opposed to the transmogrifier, which he's not imagining at all.
no, that's real. I mean, it might be
Yeah.
imagination powered, but it takes your brain waves and converts them into actual physical
Right.
transformation.
Right. Yeah. Geez, did you go blind? I'm a tiger. So
Oh, I thought you meant besides.
obviously. Yeah. So thank you, Jacob. We appreciate all the emails we get. We appreciate you sending that to us. Great idea on
Yeah,
the transmogrifier. And yeah, thank you.
yeah. Thank you for your observation too.
Yeah. And then we got one other. This is from Miriam. And she says she's sending this on behalf of her kids, Sadia, age 13, and Ollie, age 10. And so they each have something to say. So Sadia says, I really, really like your show. I really enjoy hearing you guys talk, and our family overall loves the podcast. I'm a huge fan of Calvin and Hobbes, and you guys inspired me to get my own edition of the complete Calvin and Hobbes from my bar mitzvah money. Thank you so much for making the podcast. So
Wow, yeah, what a great bar mitzvah present. That's awesome.
yeah, that was it. Excellent pick. So, and then Ollie says, first of all, also, I agree with everything that Saji said, and I'm pretty sure at one point you asked us what our favorite strips were, and I know what my favorite strip is. Well, he says he doesn't know the page number, but it's the one where Susie is president of the United States and Calvin is Wangata, king of jungle, wandering around in his underpants. Excellent pick, Ollie. That is a great strip. I love the art. I love everything about that strip.
Yes, I also agree, Ollie. That's a favorite too. My personal favorite part of that is when she says, "Oh, this dinner you cooked is great, honey. What is it? It's dog food, and don't call me honey. You can't
Yes.
feed me dog food. I'm the president of the United States." So yeah, that's a really great setup. I love the build up there too, like you said, leading to Wongata. So yeah, excellent.
Yes. Yeah, and then they asked, "Do we think Susie would make a good president?" And so before we answer that, they said that they discovered the podcast a few weeks ago and have been listening to it most nights over dinner, which just I find delightful that they spend family time listening to our podcast. That's so fun.
It really is. No, that's wow. Thank you for writing in and telling us that. That really means a lot.
Yeah, and I said I do think Susie would make a good president when she grows up. She's thoughtful and smart, and I think she has the right qualities to be a good president.
I would agree. I would add that she seems to have a fair amount of patience and maybe forgiveness too, which are also important qualities. So, because as much as
Yeah,
Calvin aggravates her, and as much as she could justifiably be upset with him, she still seems to consider him a friend and still, wants to give him a chance. So those are important qualities too. So I would agree with what Ryan said too. She's also very smart and thoughtful. So yeah, and she probably would be old enough to be president now since she was 6 in
yeah,
1985. So yeah, Susie
yeah.
Durst for president.
And then one last thing. So I wrote back and thanked them for the email, and then Miriam wrote back and said, "Thank you again for making this little gem of a podcast." As a mom of two boys, and her husband would agree. I just have to add that you're not only sharing your love of Calvin and Hobbes, you're teaching our kiddos a little bit about what nerdy, supportive, genuine grown-up friendships can look like, and that it's okay to geek out about the things you love. So thank you both for that. And they would also vote for Susie. So I agree. I
Excellent.
love being a nerd. Fun to geek out.
I agree too.
So Miriam and family, Sadia Ali, thank you so much for sending that email. That made my day.
Yeah, me too. That's like Brian was saying, that is great that that's become something your family can do together. That really means a lot.
So with that, let's go ahead and jump into the episode. And this episode, we will be talking about hamsters and salamanders and noodles. Oh my. And to those unfamiliar with Calvin and Hobbes, that probably seems like kind of a bizarre or eclectic grouping of things. But those who are familiar with the strip may know what they have in common. Now, Indy, you're familiar with the strip. What do hamsters and salamanders and noodles have in common?
Well, these are all things that are mentioned on multiple occasions in the strip, but for which we don't get the specific details.
Absolutely, exactly right. So, this episode, we're going to be talking about things that are left to the reader's imagination. And we've brought up in other episodes that Bill Watterson is really good at leaving things to our imagination in a way that is fun and funny. And we'll talk about some kind of one off instances a little bit, and then we'll focus on some of the things that Bill Watterson himself has called out, including Hamster Huey and the Gooey Kablooey and the Noodle incident, along with their salamander relatives. More on that later.
Exactly. Interesting that they both have salamander relatives.
Yeah, so Indy pointed that out to me when we were kind of figuring out what we were going to do with this episode. Oh, yeah, you're right. Okay. Yeah, they do have salamanders in common. That's interesting. So that's fun.
Coincidence.
Yeah. So again, the noodle incident and hamster Huey are the two things that Bill Watterson specifically called out in the 10th anniversary book. He said he's left those to the reader's imagination, but we'll come back to those later. Before we hit those topics, first let's talk about a couple of other times where Watterson gave us something fun but didn't spell it all out for us. So, for instance, in episode 4 about winter in Calvin and Hobbes, we talked about some times where sledding is described, but we don't actually see what happened. One of my favorites is Calvin says he's about to go down the hill, and Hobbes jumps off just as Calvin starts going. And then as he's watching, we see Hobbes, we don't see Calvin, and Hobbes goes, "Ooh, yikes!" And then he's looking up at the sky and he goes, "Wow." So we don't actually see what happened. Well, and then at the end of the strip, Calvin tells Hobbes, "Help me gather up the sled, you sissy."
A
And we don't see
gather.
what happened to we don't see what happened to the sled. So we get to imagine what Calvin's sled ride was like and what happened to the sled at the end.
Exactly. And I think Hobbes also says, "See, I told you," right before Calvin says that to him. So apparently Hobbes anticipated how this would go, or at least partially, because he does seem kind of amazed and surprised at some of it. So he knew in a
Yeah,
general sense it probably wouldn't work out well, but maybe not exactly how spectacularly it wouldn't work out well.
he didn't realize Calvin would go quite that high.
That's right. And there's a similar one, which I forget if this takes place before or after. I would guess after, and if so, maybe Calvin learned from this because he makes a small snowman to be a crash test dummy for the sled, and then he pushes it down the hill. And again, this time we see Calvin and Hobbes, but not the sled or the crash test dummy. And then, he clearly has some calamity because Hobbes kind of turns away and says, "Oh, I think I'm going to be sick." And then what does Calvin say?
Well, I wouldn't have steered like that. He deserved it.
Yeah, so I mean, maybe if you steer properly, this doesn't happen. But again, it's left to our imagination exactly what fate befell the poor snowman.
Yeah. And there's one that we mentioned also in that episode where Calvin just says, or I think it, I think it's Hobbes actually says, I've never seen a sled catch fire before. And again, we don't know how it happened. My brother-in-law, we talked about in a later episode, had a hypothesis that, it was a runner sled and it was like a flint and steel sort of thing. But whatever
Right.
it was, somehow the sled caught fire.
That's right. And maybe to a lesser extent, the wagon crash in this case, where we just see them up in a tree, and then the last panel it pans out, and then you can see they're much higher than you might have thought, and the wagon's a little bit below them on another branch, and that was
Yeah,
quite a
wedged
trek,
it.
wasn't it? Yeah,
Yeah, so lots of sledding and wagon related instances where we get to figure out in our minds what we think happened.
exactly.
Another one that we've mentioned before was at the end of a discussion about, keeping rules and being surprised that parents maybe don't really give you more than a lecture when you misbehave in certain ways. Then Hobbes says, "But try keeping live frogs in your dad's," and Calvin just doesn't want to talk about that.
Yeah,
So,
I think that might have been worms actually.
oh, sorry, yeah, you're right. Worms.
Yeah, but the
Um,
frog, I think you might be thinking of, there's another instance which is kind of similar actually. It's like mom didn't yell at them like they thought they would. Or no, it's like I think maybe he tells her about their time traveling or something, and then Hobbs is like, "Your mom isn't phased by much, is she?" And Calvin says, "Oh, it depends. She didn't take the frogs in the toilet so well, remember?"
Yeah, yeah. So with that one, we at least get where the frogs were. And you're right, the one
Right.
with keeping something in your dad, it's worms in your dad's, and we don't know what they kept it in or you know what they were doing or anything. But yeah, so we get to imagine those.
Right. Where do you think the worms were?
I kind of tend to imagine that maybe they were in like his sock drawer or something, or somewhere that he would be digging through and finding the worms in there. But
Yeah, that funnily enough, that's basically what I imagine too, like some clothing drawer. So it could have
yeah.
been something else, but it's funny that that's what both of our minds went to.
Yeah. But yeah, we don't actually know. It could have been his glove compartment or his
No, briefcase.
briefcase. Yeah, whatever. So another one that involves dad, and there are maybe kind of a couple like this. So there's one, it's a throwaway joke in a Sunday strip, and Calvin comes up to dad and says, "Hey dad, remember our car?" And dad says, "Why, of course. Wait, what do you mean remember?" So and then the rest of that strip also gives us some things to imagine because now Calvin is talking to Hobbes and he says, "Hey, Hobbes, if I did something bad, should I tell Dad?" Well, how bad? Well, hypothetically, pretty bad, like, say, to his car. How bad, hypothetically, to his car? And they go on like that for a while. And so one of my favorites is Hobbes says, "Or should we pretend the car could be fixed? If we imagined he could find the car, we could pretend it might be fixed." I see. But we never find out what happened to the car. So we
No,
just
we
get to
don't.
imagine it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree. I was about to say if you hadn't said that was my favorite part of the strip too. Like, well, if we imagined he could find it, then we could pretend that he could fix it. That also puts me in mind of another one, which I think probably comes earlier, and this one is even more vague, but it starts off seemingly innocently because Calvin comes up to his dad. Dad, do you love me? Why, of course I love you, Calvin. Would you still love me if I did something bad? Well, of course I would. I mean, something really, really. Calvin, what did you do?
Yeah, that's a great one. And I was thinking of that one. And I was also thinking with the car that we don't know what happened to it, there's another story arc where the car specifically ends up in a ditch.
Hmm.
And so I have to wonder if this was maybe something like that, but a ditch that's harder to get to or something. I don't know. What do you think might have happened to the car in that case?
Yeah, that's an interesting question because I mean, they clearly freak out when the car goes into the ditch, and that later there's another connection between that and something else we'll talk about too. But I don't know. Like, Yeah, I guess we could imagine Calvin accidentally pushed it and it rolled someplace, or
Yeah. I
yeah.
mean, it seems like it would have to be something similar to when it rolls into the ditch, which we will talk about in another episode in more detail. One of my favorite stories.
Oh yeah,
But
that's a great story, and it ties into something else that's very iconic with Calvin and Hobbes, which again we'll talk about at some length in a future episode.
yes, so that's what we call a teaser, by the way. And just stay, this is how we get you to continue following our podcast. You'll find out what that was in a few episodes.
Yes.
Uh,
Hey kids, on
yeah,
Calvin and Tell, will it shock and amaze you? Will it...
exactly. So on a kind of similar note with breaking stuff, one other story arc that this one kind of toes the line between leaving things to our imagination and spelling it out for us, but I think it'd be hard to fit in another episode, and it's a great story, so we're going to talk about it here.
I think it counts.
Yeah, we're going to say it does because it's our podcast and there's nothing you can do about it. So,
Yeah, who's gonna stop us? Ha ha ha.
yeah. And that is when Calvin breaks his dad's binoculars. So we start with Calvin running onto screen, just absolutely horrified, asking Hobbes for help. And he says he broke his dad's binoculars after being told to be super careful with them. So at this point, we know that its binoculars specifically are broken. We don't know what happened to them. We just know that somehow Calvin broke them.
So we do then find out how they broke, sort of, because Hobbes naturally wants to know, well, okay, how did you break them? Well, I dropped them.
I just dropped them.
Yeah. And Hobbes understandably says, well, you just dropped them and they broke. And what was the extra part of that story that he left out?
Well, I was running down the sidewalk, tossing them to myself at the time.
Yeah, so that's okay. That explains a little more about how just dropping them would cause them to break.
Yeah, we still don't get the full picture of how they broke or what exactly happened to them. And we're going to get a little more on that in a second. But first, they're trying to figure out how they can get out of this bad situation. And so, first, they consider maybe buying Dad some new binoculars. How much money do you have? And Calvin has $4, and Hobbes has 30 something, 34 cents or something like that, which he keeps in his pocket. Now, we've mentioned before that Hobbes seems to have pockets, at least when needed, and even a pocket watch, which is funny. Also makes me wonder if stuffed Hobbes might have pockets that everyone sees, or if Hobbes just has pockets when he needs them because that's how it works. And that is also left to our imaginations.
Yeah, I think it's kind of funny because when we have a strip like this, then I started thinking, well, yeah, maybe the stuffed version of Hobbes actually has pockets, so you can put things in there. But then I don't know if it's just me, but it never really feels like that's the case in any other strip. I always get more of an impression as no, it's just like more
Yeah.
like typical stuffed animal, to put it that way, I guess.
Yeah, I don't get the sense that stuffed Hobbes has pockets. I mean, maybe there's nothing that says he doesn't, but it would seem kind of weird to me. And I think it's just Hobbes, the living Hobbes, has pockets when he needs them.
All right.
But I love the drawing. Like he's kind of got one hand covering where the pocket would be while the other one digs in so that we don't have to explicitly see the pocket. And I don't know, it just
Right.
makes me laugh.
Yeah, he reaches towards an area near his hip, like where a pocket would be. It's kind of like this is sort of a weird connection, but like if you played a Legend of Zelda game, so you get all these items, and then Link will just like reach behind them and then pull out something that's probably much too big for where it was supposed to be anyway. But it's just, oh well, I have this. I'll just pull it out
Well,
from back here where it is.
and by much too big, you mean sometimes like a sword that's taller than Link is. So
Yeah, or like a giant hammer that's like 3 times his body length.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, you gotta love that inventory. I wish I could do that.
I know, right? I'm like, I need that kind of inventory.
Yeah. But anyway, coming back to the binoculars, how much at this point in time does Calvin find out that a good pair of binoculars would cost?
$1 to $600? Do you have any idea what my dad's going to do to me?
He won't stop at killing you, that's for sure. Mm-mm.
I also think this is funny too, and this is kind of a connection with cars, like I mentioned a second ago. In I won't go into details, but later in a car-related calamity strip, they speculate on how much a car might cost, and so
Yes.
yeah, on multiple occasions, Calvin is horrified at the thought of how much he might have to spend to fix the situation he's gotten himself into.
Yeah. And listeners, just for fun and another teaser, if you want to find out how much Calvin thinks a car costs or how much Hobbes does, you'll have to tune into another episode. So, all right. So we get to imagine at this point what Calvin thinks Dad might do to him and what Dad might actually do to him. Now, we'll find out a little bit more about what actually happens later, but first, Calvin wonders if the binoculars could be glued back together. So Hobbes asks, well, that depends. Was the lens cracked or was the casing just chipped a little? And Calvin doesn't quite know how to answer that, so he says that Hobbes better come look. And what do we find?
Calvin has what seems to be a shoebox with what basically looks like a pile of dust in it, and he dumps it out and says, "Don't sneeze."
So we find out what happens to the binoculars, sort of, but I
Yeah.
really have a hard time imagining how dropping them, even while running down the sidewalk, tossing them to yourselves, could do that to the binoculars.
Yeah, that one's a bit of a head scratcher. It's like, what kind of force would be required for, like, I don't know, just gravitational impact to completely pulverize this physical object like this? It seems like quite a bit.
Yeah, so if we have any physics experts among our listeners and you want to do the math for like how high he would have to toss them or how much stronger than usual gravity would have to be for them to be completely pulverized, please show us the math.
Yeah, that's right. I was just thinking, maybe this is another instance where we thought Earth's gravity felt especially strong today. So it's like, oh man, look what it did to these binoculars.
Annoying girl is at it again.
Yeah. Boy, man, Susie's always causing problems.
Yeah. Now, Calvin is understandably stewing about this, just internally panicking. And at the dinner table, he is thinking to himself that Dad must know that he's done something. His dad radar is probably beeping like crazy, and he's just waiting for the right moment. He knows eventually I'll crack. And then Dad says, Calvin, I admit it, I did it. I'm sorry, I'm sorry. And what is Calvin's dad going for?
So I guess this is also sort of left up to our imagination, but he says,
Yeah.
pass the so he just wanted to pass some item like the salt or a food or something. But yeah, that was what it took to get Calvin to crack. That
Yeah.
crafty dad.
Not exactly cool under pressure there.
No, it's I don't know. I always really like the art in this one too, because you see Calvin there, just like sweat dripping down his face, like furiously thinking about this. His dad's completely oblivious to all of it. The
Yeah.
whole
But Calvin is thinking Dad must know. He must know something's wrong. He just doesn't know what I did yet, but he knows I did something, and Dad has no idea.
yeah, he's waiting to nail me. And so like
Yeah. But then when Dad does find out what happens, how does he react?
so initially he's furious. So we get actually sort of amusing in a way, like depictions of his very angry, yelling face and expressions. But
You
he
broke the binoculars? Didn't I tell you to be extra careful? Have you no respect for other people's property? And all that.
Yeah. And so but he pretty quickly will say repents of this reaction.
Yes, because Calvin, I like this line from Calvin. I've at least felt to use this line in my own life sometimes, if not actually used it, which is, I have an idea, Dad. Let's pretend I already feel terrible about this and you don't need to make it any worse. And that gets him.
Yeah. His expression immediately softens, and I agree it's a good line. And it's interesting too because it really fits Calvin's sort of overall personality too, like the sarcasm and things. But you can tell he really does feel bad about it too. It's not an act or a manipulation of some kind. So I
Yeah, in
agree. I
fact,
always appreciated that.
how bad did he feel?
So terrible. He felt like he was going to barf all day.
Yeah, exactly. So they now have a little heart to heart about this, and Dad apologizes specifically for yelling and says, in the grand scheme of things, it's just a pair of binoculars. It's not that big of a deal. Really? And here's where we get the connection to what we were talking about before with cars. What's that connection?
He says, "Oh, sure." Well, after he says it's not that bad in the grand scheme of things, he says, "Sure. In another 10 years, you'll probably be wrecking my car."
And it turns out it doesn't take that long for it to happen. But
No, it may not even take 10 weeks. Maybe not
yeah,
10 days. It probably takes 10 days, but much
yeah,
less time than 10 years for sure.
yeah. So that's the story of the binoculars. And what is the lesson learned? What does Calvin get out of this experience?
So interestingly, he gets something tangible out of it. So not just maybe good reaction from his dad or what have you, more harmony after the anger, but his dad actually buys him his own pair of little binoculars as well. If you're going to break binoculars, you should at least break your own. And
Yeah.
so yeah, so you ask what lesson is learned. And so he gets the binoculars and he says, maybe I should break some of dad's power tools and see if I could get some of those too.
Yeah. So we were so close, Calvin, but I mean, I kind of get it.
I don't think he actually does that though. So maybe even though he says that, maybe he does learn a little bit of a lesson.
Yeah, at least not that we ever see.
Right. He does
Although he,
try to borrow dad's power tools on a few occasions, but he never
yeah,
tries to break them that we know of.
yeah, he does break Dad's compass, not on purpose, but he breaks Dad's compass, and that's not a power tool, but another thing that he breaks.
Yeah. But that
So
was for science. It was an experiment. So it
it was.
wasn't just being irresponsible and tossing them to himself. He was actually trying to perform an experiment.
Yeah, he was trying to see if north is up and south is down, and the compass didn't survive the trip south from the top of the tree. So,
Yeah. So, I mean, good on him for testing his hypothesis. So,
exactly. All right. Any other examples of things we get to imagine before we move on to the ones that Bill Watterson talked about?
So here's maybe a borderline example, but in many cases, we're left to imagine exactly what kind of meals Calvin's mom has cooked. And we talked about this a little bit, I think, in the mom episode, but like there's sometimes when we know what she cooks, it's like, okay, and then Calvin may or may not like it. But then there's other times where we don't know what it is. It's just unspecified. And it usually is drawn as just kind of an indistinct kind of green pile, if that makes sense.
Yeah, glop, I would call it.
Yeah. But the thing I think is interesting is so Calvin, acts like, oh, this is so horrible. I can't believe they're making me eat this. This is how cruel. This is tyranny, whatever. But there's also a lot of cases where we know he's either just saying this, like when he's like, "Oh, tortellini's so gross," then we see him looking up tortellini in a dictionary, so he doesn't even know what it is. Or times where he thinks he won't like it, but then once he finds out it's hamburger or something, oh, actually, this bite's not so bad for some reason. I can choke it down. So
If I suppress the gag reflex.
right, right. If naturally, I mean, we're taking that for granted. So yeah, it seems like he actually does like, or at least not dislike, many of the things she cooks. So I don't know. It's kind of left to the imagination, both with the art and the sort of ambiguity around that, what sorts of things she actually is cooking.
Yeah. Yeah, there's ambiguity around the food. I think usually it's not as gross as Calvin thinks. I don't think it's actually green glop. Like we talked about in episode 3 with Nevin, that's probably Calvin's perception more than what the actual food is. But yeah, we get to kind of decide, what did mom actually cook him?
Right. And maybe the sort of funniest and most evocative example of this is one we've talked about before, where we see her putting in, shrunken heads, weed killer, paint, an octopus, using a
Gasoline.
plunger to mix it all up and then like a hand mixer or something. And oh,
Yeah.
I saw what went in this. I'm not eating it, which clearly that's not really what she put in it. So
Right.
okay, so yeah, there's that again, kind of a borderline case with the food. And another like sort of example, but I think it's interesting to think about the lives of other characters when they're not interacting with Calvin, because this is
Mm.
largely left up to our imagination too. So in particular, I might think of Susie. We know a little bit about her life, but not really any particulars. So what would you say we know about Susie separate from any interaction with Calvin?
We know she apparently plays lacrosse.
Okay,
We know she's a good student. She does seem to live with her mom and dad, and she lives a few doors down from Calvin. I don't think she's right next door because when they go to her house, it seems like they have to go at least a couple of houses down.
agreed.
And let's see. I mean, she likes, she has some dolls that she likes to play with, and she likes to have tea parties. Outside of that, I don't know that there's a whole lot more that we know. She likes watching cartoons. You
True.
know that,
Yeah.
yeah.
So yeah,
Uh,
so I would agree with all that. And then, you mentioned her parents, her mom and dad a little bit. So for her home life, yeah, we know her dad has a job, and it's the kind that could involve getting transferred because there's one strip
mm.
where, Calvin does something obnoxious. I think it might involve snowman. I forget, but then she comes back and we hear her kind of calling out, "Any chance of getting transferred, Dad?" So,
Well, and she was also the new girl at the beginning of Calvin and Hobbes, so apparently they moved in. They got
right.
transferred to probably Chagrin Falls. So,
Yeah. Yeah, so we know that she lives with her dad and her mom, and her dad has some kind of job that could involve getting transferred. So maybe the military or a large corporation with offices in different cities, that kind of thing.
mm,
And he's probably the primary breadwinner since Susie's mom seems to be a stay-at-home mom like Calvin's mom is. Now we
mm,
don't know this for sure, but in the strip where Susie comes to Calvin's house after school, she has to stay there until her mom gets back, which is treated as unusual. So typically, Susie would just go home and her mom would be there.
right.
Yeah, and then we also see her doing some domestic things, on a couple occasions, like asking Susie to go see if she can borrow an egg. Yeah, so that's really all we know about them. She also has a couple lines in the strip and does appear, unlike Susie's father, who is implied to be there, but we don't actually see or hear from in the strip.
Yeah, well, so does she have lines? I know there are some implied lines.
So I think she has one line and maybe one implied line.
Okay, what's the actual line?
So the actual line is what I was referring to a second ago. She says, "Did they have an egg you could borrow?" And
Oh,
Susie
that's
says,
right.
"No one was home, Mom." And I think I know a strip. Like, can you remember? Well, is it true that no one was home?
No, well, that depends on what you mean by no one was home, but uh,
Okay.
Calvin, as Stupendous Man, was there, and he was about to liberate some cookies. But uh, I think from Susie's perspective, that may equate to no one's home, meaning there's no one upstairs, if you know what I mean. So,
That's true. That could be what she was getting at.
yeah,
So yeah, he opens the door. It's like, zounds, a fool mortal female.
yeah.
Which,
Uh,
pro tip, don't, if you like run into a woman in your life, don't refer to her as a fool mortal female because that usually doesn't go well.
Shoot, that's my problem.
Yeah, that's
Uh,
so anyone out there, if you were having troubles in this area, yeah.
yeah.
One other thing I think is kind of interesting about this, and I forget if we mentioned this before, but if Susie had told Stupendous Man that she needed an egg. I mean, conceivably, that could have been a mission that Stupendous Man could have gone on. So I wonder if he would have actually helped her had she told him that's why she was there.
Yeah, I mean, I think we talked about this also. It could go either way because on the one hand, there's a citizen who needs your help, but on the other hand, it's a girl. So,
True.
you know, you gotta
But he
weigh
doesn't
the.
seem to treat her as an annoying girl. She's just a random fool mortal female. So I think it's at least plausible he might have actually gotten her the egg, heroically rescued the egg for her.
Yeah, it's a possibility. So we'll leave that to our imaginations as well, I suppose.
Yeah, that's one more thing. We don't know because Susie doesn't even try. She just gives up and says, "No one was home, Mom." Boy, how
Now,
could she?
so I just want to see what we've got for implied lines from Susie's mom. So I can think of Calvin when Hobbes gets stolen by Susie. No,
Oh, you know what? There is something there. Okay.
well, so Susie says, "Get away from our door with that drill." There's
Oh,
another one where they're playing football. That's what it is. They're playing
yeah,
football,
that's what it is.
and Calvin rings the doorbell trying to go into Susie's house to get away from Hobbes as part of his strategy. And Hobbes eventually tackles him before Susie answers the door. And then Susie comes out and says, "Mom says our doorbell is not a toy." So there's
That's
that
right.
line.
Okay. I
Uh,
think there's at least one other.
The other one that I can think of is Calvin goes to Susie's house holding a gigantic snowball, and he's, ha 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 ha, and rings the doorbell. And Susie's mom opens the door, and he's like, "Oh, hi, Mrs. Durkins. I am selling huge snowballs. Would you like to buy one?" And so presumably she said something when she opened the door, but
Probably. I mean, it could be she was just standing there and Calvin kind of freaked out and she didn't have to say anything, but
that is a possibility.
yeah. Okay, there's at least one other where she definitely does speak to somebody though. Can you remember what
Yeah,
that?
yeah. There's one. I think it's the one where Calvin and Susie are playing, and it might be the one where Susie is pretending to be the president, and eventually it ends up with Calvin taking all his clothes off except his underwear, and being Wonga Ta, king of jungle, or something like that, and he's gonna go find his tiger friend. And so then we see Calvin and Hobbes walking together, Calvin in his underwear only, and we see Mom in the foreground talking to Mrs. Durkins, saying something like, "What do you mean he left all his clothes with Susie?" or something like that.
Right. So I guess technically we don't know that was Susie's mom. It could have been Mr. Durkins,
That's
but
true.
I think I always thought it was supposed to be Mrs. Durkins, though. And like we said,
Oh,
she does have some presence in the strip other than being spoken to like Susie's dad. So it's probably more likely.
yeah, and there's actually one more that
Okay.
definitely is Susie's mom that also involves a giant snowball. Do you know which one I'm thinking of?
Right. Well, that's when, like we talked about before, when Earth's gravity was especially strong today, and
Yeah,
normal Calvin can't throw a snowball. So Stupendous Man, who has the strength of a million mortal men, takes a giant snowball, flies up, and launches it from the stratosphere right at Annoying Girl, vanquishing her in the name of justice.
right.
Yeah, so later, mild mannered Calvin's mother gets a call from Susie's mother about this incident.
Yeah, and she specifically says Susie's mom says you dropped a huge, bowling ball sized snowball on her or whatever. I don't remember the exact line, but she specifically says Susie's
Yeah,
mom says this. So
exactly. It's like, oh, that couldn't have been me. I'm very mild mannered.
must have been stupendous, man. I'm sure Susie deserved whatever she got.
Right. And if, as we speculated, she was responsible for Earth's greater gravity, then he has a point there.
It's true. Yeah.
That is pretty fiendish and super villainy.
Yeah. All right. Well, yeah. So those are some good examples.
Yes. And then there's also Miss Wormwood, but I think we'll save her for a future episode. So she'll be interesting to say, like, what little we know and what's left to our imagination with her also.
Yeah, we do know a few things, but yeah, we get to imagine a lot. But yeah, we'll come back to her later. All right, so in that case, let's move on to the examples that Bill Watterson actually called out. So he specifically said he never described Hamster Huey or the noodle incident, preferring to leave them to the reader's imagination, where, and I quote, they're sure to be more outrageous. So
Probably. Although I would be interested to know like if he had some kind of idea in mind, even if he never said it. I mean, maybe it was just he didn't even think about it like on purpose, like, no, no, I'm not even going to think in my own mind. But if he had to say what it was, that would be interesting to hear.
yeah, well, and I do kind of wonder, is it more outrageous in my head than what Bill Watterson might have come up with? Because he has a pretty good imagination. So
He does, and can do some pretty outrageous things. And one that kind of comes to mind just really just now, which I've always loved, it starts off with random people in a nondescript office building, and it's like, oh, hey, Ted, would you like some coffee? I'm going to get some. No, thanks, Frank. So then Frank's walking along. He gets shot. It's like, oh no, Frank, run. And then we see a group of deer with rifles who are out hunting. Wow, this is a big one. Good job. I think short for Bambi.
yes,
Then yeah, so this was, I believe, Calvin's report on overpopulation, how in a like cruel but necessary act,
yeah,
the human population had gotten too big, so it's been culled. So
yeah, which also goes to the one where he imagines Deinonychus attacking Susie and other kids. He has this kind of thread going. I wonder if it was the same report.
oh boy, that would be something. Like if he didn't get in enough trouble with the first half of the report, then
Yeah. How do you weave all that together? And if it is all the same report, how do you get far enough into it to have said both things before the teacher stops you?
yeah, I think it must be two separate reports, but
Gotta
yeah,
be.
similar things like you say. And another one of my favorites too, like especially what I guess is the second panel, because the first one just starts, oh, Susie's playing. She hears footsteps behind her. Is it her friends come to join her? No, it's a ferocious pack of Deinonychus dinosaurs. And then just the no, and then Susie's horrified expression and running, and
Yeah.
that cracks me up every time I see it.
Yeah, that's a great strip.
Then maybe I don't know, but another favorite line of mine where no, it's not that one because that one has a Tyrannosaurus, but similar theme. A Tyrannosaurus is on the playground,
Mm,
and the children walking in single file are gobbled up like children McNuggets,
yes,
which is one of my all-time favorite lines ever.
that is a great line. We didn't bring that. I meant to bring that one up in the dinosaur episode and forgot to. So
Well,
I'm
now
glad you,
here we are.
yeah,
Before we
glad you brought
left
it up
that to
here.
the reader's imagination, but now we're saying it.
Yeah, it's too bad we don't have our experts to opine on how accurate that might be, but that's all right.
Yeah. So, but yes, so those are examples of Bill Watterson being pretty creative and outrageous. So I think you're right. It's maybe the details are more outrageous in our heads, but I think that's at least debatable.
Yeah. So let's talk about them. We'll start with Hamster Huey and the Gooey Kablooey, and let's go through all the strips that mention it so that, and we'll see what we know about the story and what we get to imagine. So, first, do you want to guess how many times Hamster Huey is mentioned or shown in the strip?
Okay, so I'm going to guess 7.
All right, so that's a real good guess.
Okay.
It's it kind of depends how you count it, but if you count it a certain way, you're exactly right.
Oh,
So
wow.
So there are 6 strips that deal with Hamster Huey and the Gooey Kablooey, but then you know how sometimes the books have extra art. One of the extra arts is Calvin's dad reading Hamster Huey, and Calvin with this pleasant expression on his face, and Dad is looking disgusted. So
Okay.
if you if you count all of those, yeah, it's 7.
Yay. Kudos
Good
for
job.
Navigator Nebular.
We finally got one. Yeah.
I know, right? That is maybe the first time we've ever guessed something correctly. So, hey,
Yeah.
all right. Listeners, we did it.
That was me throwing confetti.
All
Uh,
right.
yeah. So the first instance is in July of 1988, and it comes in a Sunday strip throwaway joke. And we've mentioned before, so in this case, it's the opposite of what happens in most strips, right?
Right.
What does Dad think and what does Calvin think?
Okay, so yeah, Dad actually suggests this story. Oh, here's a story you might like: Hamster Huey and the Gooey Kablooey.
Yeah,
But
and
right, so but Calvin, okay, I'm not totally sure. I think this is how he reacts. He does something like, "How good could it be if it hasn't been made into an animated movie?" Is that right?
yeah, I think
Okay,
it's animated TV show, but yeah,
I think that's what it is. Okay, yeah. So he's skeptical at first, but
yeah. So the rest of the time, well, so first of all, let me just summarize what happens in the rest of the strip because it's a Sunday strip. And so that those first two panels were a throwaway joke. And then the rest of the strip, Calvin is saying, I hope tonight's story wasn't as boring as last night's. It put me right to sleep. And then Dad says, don't worry, this story will keep you up all night. And it's called The Disembodied Hand That Strangled People. And Calvin's dad sticks his hand through his shirt. And he's like, ah, there it is. Got me. And Calvin passes out. I should have thought of that years ago.
so yeah, that Calvin did get an exciting story that night.
It
That's for
it
sure.
wasn't boring, yeah. And so I think there are three nights here, maybe. It could be two nights, but I have to believe last night's story wasn't Hamster Huey because you said but a minute ago, and the
Right.
answer to that is Calvin likes Hamster Huey, as we will see.
He
So I
really
think,
liked Hamster Huey.
yeah. So I think we get Hamster Huey and then some boring story and then the disembodied hand that strangled people, not necessarily on consecutive nights, but I think it's three separate nights.
Yeah, I
So
think you're correct about that. That makes
yeah.
the most sense.
But we find out that Calvin really likes Hamster Huey a few months later in December of 1988. This time, Calvin specifically asks for Hamster Huey, and Dad doesn't want to read it. Now, I think we actually get a pretty good buildup of Dad's reactions here as the strip goes on, because this time, Dad wants to read something else, but he's not like upset about it exactly. He just doesn't really want to read it again.
Right.
And, yeah. So Calvin begs, Dad relents. And then Calvin asks Dad to do three things. And what are those three things?
He says, "Now you'll be sure to do the squeaky voices, the gushy sound effects, and the happy hamster hop, right?"
And now Dad pushes back a little more. Look, can't we read something else? So it seems that those aspects in particular are things that he doesn't like.
Right, and that
So
Calvin really likes.
yeah. And so the happy hamster hop actually comes back at least one other time. And so I just want to take a second and talk about it's left to our imagination, right? We don't know what the happy hamster hop is. In my head, it's probably something mentioned somewhere in the book, and then Hamster Huey did the happy hamster hop all the way to whatever, something like that.
Yeah.
And then I've seen books like this before. I imagine at the end it's like, "Hey kids, you can do the happy hamster hop too. Just follow these directions. Jump to the left, jump to the whatever." And so
Yeah.
Dad did that for Calvin one time, and Calvin thought it was great, and now he wants it every time.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I've definitely seen kids' books that do that too. One other possibility is it could be an explicit part of the narration. So I could imagine a story where it says, and then Hamster Huey jumps to the left on one leg, then jumped to the right on another leg. Then he jumped all around, and the townsfolk said, "What are you doing, Hamster Huey? This is my happy hamster hop," or something like that. So
Yeah,
yeah, I think either of those are believable, or both even. It could be,
that's
somebody,
true. It could do
"Hey,
both.
kid, do you want to do it too?" Like you said. So yeah, I think that would really fit with a lot of children's books and things that children would like and that parents might quickly tire of. So
Yes. So yeah, I think something like that is probably what we're dealing with. So that'll come back a little later, but first, about a year after that strip, December of '89, we get Calvin again asking for Hamster Huey, and Dad refuses a little more adamantly this time. I really don't want to read that. We read that all the time. And Calvin yells, I want Hamster Huey. And so Dad reads it, but how does he read it this time?
so this time he reads it, and I think we get Calvin and Hobbes commenting on it after the fact, and it's like I don't remember Hamster Huey having quite that sarcastic tone of voice or doing everything so fast.
Yeah. So it sounds like Dad still read the story as written, but he was like, And then Hamster Huey would do the happy hamster hop or something like that.
I mean, jump to the left and jump to the right. Blah, blah, blah. Like,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So he's
yeah,
getting real frustrated.
patience with this.
Yes. Now, a few months later, we're going to get the happy hamster hop back because we get another throwaway joke to a Sunday strip. So in this strip, I'll tell you the main strip first. It's this time unclear whether it's the same night as the throwaway joke or whether this time Dad convinced Calvin to allow a different story, or maybe it's a different night and because it seems like it's Calvin's idea. He wants a story about Hobbes and him.
Right.
So the main strip is about that, and Dad kind of editorializes, and they filled their innards with sugary cereal and rotted their brains with cartoons. Hey, no editorials. And then it's the one where Dad ends the story before they've even gotten to lunchtime, and he says, "Well, this story doesn't have an end. You and Hobbes will write more of it every day, and it's very sweet. No, this is a great story about as if it never ends."
Yes.
Okay, that's the main strip. But in the throwaway joke, Mom says, "Are you going to read Calvin a story tonight? Only if it's not that awful Hamster Huey and the Gooey Kablooey." And what does Mom think of this?
But you look so cute doing the happy hamster hop.
I don't want to look cute. So,
And I always loved that interchange because this seems so real to life. Like I could totally imagine a married couple actually having this exchange with each other. So
yeah, for sure. And
yeah,
so,
mom's
yeah,
sort of delighted expression and thinking like, "Oh, you look so cute doing the happy hamster hop." Like kind of no, clearly like ribbing him a little bit about it. So
yeah, and I have to wonder if maybe Dad has read Hamster Huey even more times than he would have been willing to because his wife has said to him, "Oh, but Calvin loves that story and you look so cute. Please do it for me," sort of thing. And
yeah,
all right.
believable. It's also kind of like when Hobbes gets lost in the woods. It's like, oh, he's really upset that Hobbes is out in the woods. I'll bet he is. No, I mean he's really upset. I bet he is. Really upset.
Yeah, so there could even be like he really wants you to read Hamster Huey. I know, but I don't like it. No, I mean he really wants you to read Hamster Huey.
Yeah, so that would definitely track with their characters too.
Yeah, it would. And
And that
then
probably does look cute doing the happy hamster hop.
yeah, I'll just also throw out, I imagine that the happy hamster hop involves holding your hands up in front of you with your fingertips pointed down, kind of, like a hamster does when it's up on its hind legs. So,
Okay, that makes
that would
sense.
make you look cute, right?
Yeah, and if you have to do the squeaky voices too, I mean, maybe I don't know if you have to
Yeah,
do it while you're doing the happy hamster hop, but if so, that might be even more cute. So
true. Yeah, so if any listeners want to send videos of themselves doing the happy hamster hop, we would love to see it.
we would love to see that.
I'm not doing it, but if you want to do it, I'll watch it.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I'll just say that we didn't plan to say that. This was just something Ryan came up with impromptu, but yes, that would be very fun to send us videos of the happy hamster hop. So
Yeah. Maybe we'll even put it on our YouTube channel if you want us to.
that would be hilarious.
Yeah. All right, but then we get in 1992 one where Dad is saying, "All right, it's time for your bedtime story. We can read anything except," and Calvin says, "I want Hamster Huey and the Gooey Kablooey." And now Dad really doesn't want to read it. "No, we've read it a million times. You have it memorized. It's the same every day.
I
If you
want
don't read me
hamster
Hamster,
Huey.
if you don't read me Hamster Huey, I won't go to sleep." Fine, but how does he do it this time?
Well, so again, it's left up to our imagination. So this is kind of a double thing of what we were talking about because the original Hamster Huey story is left up to our imagination, but now it's further left up to our imagination how the story was different this time because again, we get Calvin and Hobbes kind of reminiscing about it afterwards, and Calvin says, "Boy, the story was sure different that time." And Hobbes says, "I'll say, do you think the townsfolk will ever find Hamster Huey's head?"
Gross. Yeah, you gotta wonder what Dad did with that, and maybe we'll talk about that some more in a second. But
Yeah,
that's
but yeah, he's clearly completely snapped at this point. Not just sarcastic and fast. Now it's a very different story, and Hamster Huey apparently is decapitated in some way. So
Yeah. Woof. All right. Good work, Dad, I guess. Um, Now, I know everybody listening is wondering because we said at the top of the episode that this is somehow connected to salamanders.
That's true.
So,
Say that.
yeah. So let's talk about how this is connected to salamanders. In 1993, we learned that the literary world is abuzz about the sequel to Hamster Huey and the Gooey Kablooey. And Indy, what is the title to that sequel?
The title is Commander Coriander Salamander and her single-hander bellylander.
Yes, and while we're at it, what's the name of the author of these books?
The author is Mabel Syrup.
Yes. So I hope that's not a pin name. I hope that's her actual name. But
Yeah, her last name was Syrup. Her parents thought Mabel, that would be a nice name.
yeah. So Calvin excitedly tells Dad that this book is coming out and we have to buy it.
We have
And
it.
yeah, and Dad's feeling on the matter is that architects should be required to live in the buildings they design, and children's book authors should be forced to read their stories aloud every night for the rest of their stupid lives.
He has this really like defeated expression on his face as he's saying, kind of slumped down in his chair, which is a
Yeah,
great contrast to Calvin coming in to tell his dad specifically, like all excited. You're not gonna believe it. She's writing
yeah.
a sequel. We have to get it.
And I love how the literary world is a buzz.
Yes.
This children's book.
Yeah. Which almost makes me wonder if Calvin somehow saw like a news article about this or something, where maybe it even said that, right? Like the literary
Yeah,
buzz was
yeah. So, whatever the case, yeah, they're a buzz. I guess it's a really great story. So, let's kind of put together what we know about Hamster Hughes. So, as you said, we know it's written by Mabel Syrup. Obviously, there's some sort of gooey kablooey. We can maybe talk about what that might be in a second. There seem to be townspeople. Now, those are only referred to in the one where we're not sure if they can find Hamster Huey's head, but Calvin and Hobbes don't act like it's strange that there are townspeople, so I assume they're part of the normal story too.
right. That's how I always took it. And I sort of imagined like all the characters were probably animals, so the townspeople are probably also hamsters or whatever other kind of animals there might be. So
And apparently they're not all hamsters. There's at least one salamander, which we'll come back
right.
to in a moment.
Yeah, so
There's
it's
a
kind of
happy
like a
hamster.
whole town of anthropomorphic animals.
Yeah, yeah. So maybe some of them are hamsters and some of them are salamanders and some of them are lizards or birds or whatever. But yeah, yeah. So and there's a happy hamster hop, and then of course Commander Coriander Salamander seems to figure into this story enough to merit having a sequel devoted to, I assume, her. I think it's a she because it's and her single-hander bellylander.
Right. That's
It,
what I always took it as.
yeah. So the $10 million question: what do you think happens in Hamster Huey? And as a bonus, how does Commander Coriander Salamander figure in?
Okay, so here's my stab at it. So I think the gooey kablooey is some sort of big exploding mess that happens to the town, probably caused in some way by Huey. So
Right.
then maybe everyone gets mad at him, and at first he's sad, but eventually he sets off to find a way to clean it up. And he eventually succeeds. The town is saved. Everyone forgives him. And then he does the happy hamster hop because everything is okay again.
Okay. Yeah, that's plausible. I like that.
Okay, yeah, so that's my stab at what the original story might be. But then that made me think that maybe this means that in the different version that Dad makes up, the story starts the same, but the townsfolk get so mad at Hamster Huey that they tell him they're sick of him. So again, kind of fourth wall breaking, just like Dad is sick of Hamster Huey. The townsfolk are sick of Hamster Huey, and they kick him out of town. Now Huey still sets off to try to make things right, but he suffers a comically absurd and fatal series of misfortunes, maybe involving becoming a kablooey himself. So
Mhm.
then, in the end, most of his body parts rain down from the sky into the town square, except his head, which was never seen again.
Wow. I like it.
Thank you. Yeah, so that's based on my original imagining of the normal story. That's what I think maybe Dad came up with out of insane frustration or what have you.
That is pretty outrageous. I'll give you that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, but the second part was how does Commander Coriander Salamander fit in? So I actually think, hopefully, this won't be disappointing, but I think she doesn't play a big role in the original Hamster Huey story, but maybe she is like a side character. She's one of the townsfolk. So
Mhm.
but then, like, it's sort of a shared world. So, oh, in the sequel, now we're going to talk about this other character from that town. And now it's her very own adventure. And then maybe later there's going to be other characters too. So it's a whole like this world with this town of these animals. And then, Hamster Huey gets a story, Commander Coriander Salamander gets a story. And then maybe other people will too, much to the delight of Calvin's dad.
Right. Yeah, there could be even more sequels. That's true. If you do it that way, you can
Yeah.
really a lot of side stories.
But anyways,
Okay.
that's my ideas about it. What about you?
Okay, so I have kind of similar thoughts. I think in my head, the gooey kablooey may happen at the end of the story,
Okay.
and it's kind of like a fable, like uh be careful to, I don't know, clean up your messes because if you don't, this could happen, sort of a thing. And
Okay.
so, there's a series of events that lead to a gooey kablooey. I also imagine something, some factory kablooies and it's goo. And since the author is Maple Syrup, maybe it's a syrup factory. Uh,
Yeah, that could be it.
so, yeah. So that, the townspeople maybe aren't necessarily, may or may not be mad at Hamster Huey at the end. I kind of was imagining it as like maybe they're all responsible in some way for this gooey kablooey, but Hamster Huey is kind of leading the charge
All
and
right.
responsible for the gooey kablooey. And so at the end, they all learn the valuable lesson of, you know, don't clog up the steam pipe or whatever. So, uh, and then in the version where dad alters things, it's still kind of that. Maybe it's even the story is fairly similar up to the end, and then the big kablooey happens. But now instead of everyone just being covered in goo, poor hamster Huey has been decapitated in the explosion, and the townspeople could never find his head or something like that. So,
All right.
and then
It-
just as an alternate hypothesis for how Commander Coriander Salamander could fit in, either in your version or my version of the story. I actually kind of like how she might fit into your version better, but that Commander Coriander Salamander could use her single-hander bellylander in some way to either instigate or help clean up the explosion.
Okay.
I don't know what a single-hander bellylander is, but maybe it's able to fly in and help clean up the mess, or maybe Commander Coriander Salamander is actually the mischievous character that flies in and causes Hamster Huey to go do whatever Hamster Huey does that results in the gooey kablooey or something like that.
Okay.
So
Yeah, all of those sound like plausible children's stories too. So yeah,
yeah,
just versions of the plot.
and then the sequel could be maybe not so much a sequel as like how there's Ender's Game and Ender's Shadow, where it's the same
Okay.
story told from two different perspectives. It could be something like that.
Oh yeah, that would be interesting. Like, okay, so we've got yeah, here's the gooey kablooey from Hamster Huey's perspective, and here's the same story from Commander Coriander Salamander's perspective.
Right. Yeah. So I could see that going either way. I am sure our listeners could come up with a whole bunch of other ways these stories could go. So if you have ideas of what you think Hamster Huey and the Gooey Kablooey is about, feel free to let us know. Of course, it's not like our answers are right. There is no right answer. So I'd love to hear what you think.
Yeah, and the same for Commander Coriander Salamander.
Yeah.
Won't forget her and her single-hander bellylander. So
Yeah, for sure. Speaking of salamanders, see, I'm
that's
getting better
right.
at this. Yeah. Let's talk about some famous incidents in Calvin and Hobbes, one of which involves a salamander, at least one salamander. So we all know about the noodle incident, but before that, there was the salamander incident, which is like the noodle incident, not described for the reader. So we have to imagine it.
Right. And I
Now,
think this is kind of like the proto noodle incident. Like, I think this idea then became the noodle incident later.
yeah. Now, I don't think they're the same incident at
No, I
all.
don't think so either.
Yeah, but I think that inspired Bill Watterson to now have a recurring incident that we don't know about, and I think maybe he liked the word noodle better, but we'll
It's
come
a
to that in a second.
thing for some reason.
Yeah. So the salamander incident is only mentioned once in December of 1987. In this strip, Calvin is asking, what criteria does Santa use to determine who's good or bad? Should we take extenuating circumstances into consideration? Shouldn't I have legal counsel? As an aside, in another arc in 1990, Hobbes does serve as Calvin's legal counsel, and maybe those two things are connected. Maybe it's even the same thing because we've talked about how you could read Calvin and Hobbes non-linearly if you
Yeah.
want to. Although maybe they're not connected because in the salamander incident, unlike the noodle incident, Calvin doesn't actually deny his guilt. In fact, he seems to concede that he actually did whatever it is. He just says it was temporary insanity. Whereas in the arc where Hobbes is Calvin's lawyer, Hobbes suggests pleading insanity, and Calvin says they're trying to show that he's innocent, not that he was insane. So I think maybe those aren't the same. He maybe when he was talking to Hobbes about the salamander incident, he was like, I should have legal counsel, but then he didn't ask for legal counsel until later.
Yeah, and that could have inspired Hobbes though. So I was like, all right, well, just like it was temporary insanity when you did the salamander thing, now we'll plead you were insane at the time of these alleged crimes. Like, we're not
Yeah.
keeping an insanity plea. We're saying it's
I'll have you know, insulting an attorney is a what is it, a
a penal offense,
penal offense. Yeah.
which probably is not true, but
I,
I
I,
can
I don't think that's true.
probably see
Right.
why Hobbes would act like it was.
Yeah. But
So yeah,
anyway,
I do find that an interesting coincidence. So like you're right, he admits he did the other one, but temporary insanity, that's all it was. But this time, no, I wasn't insane. I'm innocent. I didn't do these things.
yeah.
And yeah, Hobbes advises him to settle the case out of court if that's the case.
In a minute, you and I are going to settle this out of doors.
Yeah, so we have a little difference of opinion on whether Calvin did or did not do the things he was accused of, at least in this case.
Yeah. Now, that's the only mention of the salamander incident, but then there's the noodle incident. Now, how many times is the noodle incident mentioned?
Okay, so for this one, it feels like more than this, but especially given our usual track record for this, I'm going to guess four.
All right. So this is a banner day because you nailed it
Really?
again. Yeah, there's
I
four
did.
mentions.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yes. Wait, listeners, twice in a row. We got it right. We did it. Yay.
All
We
right.
are the champions, my friend. Okay.
Anyway, moving on.
Moving on. Yes. All right. So it is four then.
Four times. Yeah. So the first mention is in September of 1990, which is later than I would have guessed if you had asked me when is the first time we
Hmm.
hear about the noodle incident. But now I will say it's not actually called the noodle incident yet,
Right.
but I think it is the same thing.
Yeah,
So,
I think because he mentions noodles and then later we had the noodle incident. I think it's
yeah,
pretty clearly referring to the same event. So I would agree with you on that.
yeah. So this is part of a story where mom goes to a parent-teacher conference, much to Calvin's dismay. What, you're going to talk to my teacher? So,
It's like,
uh,
oh, actually, I forgot to tell you. She said I was doing so well, you didn't need to go. Honest.
really? She said you don't have to come. Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh, but mom doesn't buy that, and so off she goes to the parent-teacher conference. And while she's gone, Calvin is packing his bags because he tells Hobbes, mom is going to a parent-teacher conference. Oh, well, what are you gonna say when she gets home? Buddy, if you think I'm even gonna be here.
Yeah.
So
So
that
he plans to, yeah, just take off and avoid the consequences.
Yeah, so he's packing his bags. Meanwhile, mom gets home and dad asks how the conference went. And mom says that when she got there, all the kids had drawn self portraits and put them on their desks so the parents could find their child's desk. Oh, that's a cute idea. And what did Calvin's portrait look like?
So Calvin's mom says there was one picture of a green kid with six eyes, fangs, and his finger up his nose.
Now, she doesn't explicitly say that that was Calvin's self-portrait, but I think we
However,
all know.
yeah, yeah, and she kind of slumps down in the chair. Things went downhill from there.
Yeah. So then she goes up to Calvin's room and I wasn't finished packing it. I mean, well, just lies, all lies. Miss Wormwood hates kids. She told you about the noodles, didn't she? Well, she was I was framed. I would never do that. And what does mom say?
What noodles?
Um, noodles? I didn't say noodles. What I said was so
Yeah, so he seems a little guilty at this point, but I don't know. Maybe he was framed, like he said, but he clearly doesn't want to get into what happened with the noodles.
yeah, and it feels a little bit like the binocular story where it takes minimal prying and he's basically confessing. So,
Right, which seems to happen to Calvin more than once, actually, but
mm. Now, so I did mention before, this is not called the noodle incident, it's just the noodles, but I do wonder how many objects Watterson went through before landing on noodles. You know, she told you about the spatula, she told you about the salamander, she told you about the and eventually landing on noodles, which I think is really about as good of a word as you can get for this.
yeah, because I mean, if you're just trying to pick sort of a random item to be the subject of something sort of spectacularly bad that Calvin might have done. It's like, okay, what do you pick? So yeah, like I said a second ago, noodle sounds funny for some reason, and then maybe it's because it's not immediately obvious what it would be, so it's easier to leave it to the reader's imagination. So like if you pick some classroom supply, like, oh, she told you about the erasers, didn't she? Then you might just think, oh, he, clapped them too much and made people cough or some, some just
I mean, we
bullshit.
even get a strip where that happens. So
That's true. Yeah. So, but yeah, so we pick something that, yeah, we can imagine doing something mischievous and disruptive with it, but it's in no way obvious what that would be.
yeah. And I mean, I think noodle is just a funny word on
Yeah,
its face. And it's something that a kid could conceivably have access to for various reasons in an elementary school.
that's
It's,
true.
we'll talk about a few, but you know, there could even be you make art projects out of noodles sometimes in elementary school, and there are other reasons you might have noodles there. So,
I
you know,
mean,
it's
the
plausible.
cafeteria could serve noodles.
Yeah, exactly. So all right. So a few months later, so that was in September of 1990. In December of that year, Calvin is mailing this enormous letter to Santa, and Hobbes is helping him. They're actually walking back from having mailed it. And Hobbes says Santa better bring him everything on the list since he's been so good.
Or no,
Actually,
Calvin says that.
yeah. Calvin says that. And I'm trying to remember, is he carrying it to the mailbox or are they walking back from the mailbox? I'm not sure, but
I feel like maybe they were commenting on the way to the mailbox, but I could be wrong about that. Maybe it is on the way back.
yeah, in my head, it's Calvin saying, "Thanks for helping me mail that" when
That's
the strip
possible.
starts. But yeah, I'm I don't have the strips in front of me as is often the case. So listeners, it's one of those two things. I don't know.
Sure.
Uh, but anyway, Calvin is saying Santa better bring me everything on that list since I've been so good. And Hobbes says, "What about the noodle incident?" And Calvin says, "No one can prove I did that." Oh,
Which later we find out does seem to be the case that no one can prove that.
yeah, no one. And we'll see what I mean by that emphasis in a second. But in 1992, Calvin has to write a story for school. We talked about this in episode 21 about the time machine. This is the one where they eventually go forward in time a couple hours to pick up the story and hilarity ensues. But before that, Calvin is upset that he has to write this story. He's like, I can't tell stories. And Hobbes says, what about your explanation of the noodle incident?
That was the pure, unvarnished truth.
Oh, don't be so modest. You deserved a Pulitzer. So
Yeah,
that
so Hobbes isn't totally convinced by this.
yeah, he's not buying it, although again, it seems that we can't actually prove it was Calvin. He has an explanation that I guess can't be debunked, even if it is a little far-fetched.
That's right.
Uh,
And so that too is left to the reader's imagination, what the noodle incident was and how Calvin explained it.
right. And then finally, in December of 1995, one of the last strips, the second to last Sunday strip, Christmas Eve specifically, we get the one that Indy has specifically said he likes so much, and I love it too. It's a great
Oh
strip.
yeah.
But so the elf is talking to Santa about whether Calvin should get presents, and Santa says, "Ah, yes, the noodle incident, kid." So now
That's right.
the elf actually comes to Calvin's defense a little bit. He says apparently that this was a while ago, and based on the first instance, it seems like maybe this happened in September, or at least that's my guess of what a while ago means, because it was enough time for there to be a parent-teacher conference about it, but it's like between the start of the school year and the parent-teacher conference, probably happened in September. But so a while ago, and the elf notes that Calvin claims he was framed, and they can't verify the particulars because accounts seem to vary. So even Santa can't prove Calvin did it. So, I mean,
Yeah, so which I think speaks pretty well for Calvin's legal case, right? So
yeah,
if you're under surveillance by like a worldwide magical network with the sole purpose of judging whether you're naughty or nice, and even they can't prove whether you did it. I mean, I don't see how we can possibly convict him.
yeah. I will also say Calvin in another strip suggests that Santa can't possibly be watching every kid all the time. He just, catches enough bad kids to scare the rest of us. Sounds like maybe he's right.
He
So,
could be, yeah. So, yeah, Santa, and we do know because Santa, the elf says to Santa, "Oh, the team thought you should handle this one personally." So
right.
clearly, there are other people in the organization that handle a lot of things, but then Santa comes in some cases or when it's really important. So,
Yeah. So whatever the noodle incident is, if even Santa can't prove Calvin did it, I think we got to let him off the hook.
yeah, Your Honor, the defense rests.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
case dismissed, right?
Yeah. And of course, when then you've got a tiger vouching for the kid's character, I mean, that just adds weight to the claim that Calvin is a good kid, right?
Exactly. He tries to be sort of good when he's not tempted otherwise. Like how
So what else do you
else
want?
do you want? Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's all.
So yeah, that's the noodle incident plays a role. Like I mentioned before, even though I did guess four, it feels like more. That's because
Mhm.
it kind of builds on itself, right? It's this recurring reference again left up to our imagination, but I think that strengthens it every time too. Then it's like, oh yeah, they mentioned noodles before. Oh hey, the noodle incident again. So
Yeah. So it makes it seem like it's more prominent than it is.
yes.
Yeah. But that's it. Four mentions of the noodle incident, although there are a few other strips that might connect to it. So there's a story arc where Calvin does a report on the brain and brings as a visual aid some cooked spaghetti. So maybe something happened with those noodles.
Potential.
Yeah. Another one time at lunch, Calvin dumps some manicotti down his shirt and then opens the bottom of his shirt. And as the noodles come pouring out, with the sound effect being bork, which I love, he claims that his intestines have burst through his stomach wall, causing Susie to faint. So I don't think that is the noodle incident, but he says he wants some more so that maybe he can get out of math. So that could be the noodle incident, although I think it would be pretty easy to prove Calvin did that. So maybe not.
Yeah. Plus, as we've established before in the strip you referenced, Susie's a girl, so she would probably snitch to Santa about things Calvin did. So
That's true. I mean, she's a squealer. Well, Calvin's the squealer too, according to Susie. So yeah.
I guess
Anyway,
both are, but
yeah.
but yeah. So I think Santa would have known that Calvin was guilty if that were the noodle incident. So
Yeah, so that's probably not the noodle incident, but
yeah,
it
I
might have
think it's
inspired.
pretty interesting that this does seem to work on Susie. Like she, because there's other strips where Calvin does something and Susie's it's like you're clearly being just ridiculous and gross. This is stupid. But yeah, this actually seems to really freak her out. So
Yeah. Now, this might have inspired the noodle incident if it's not the noodle incident itself. Maybe he got more and more creative with what he could do with noodles. But, that's pure speculation as opposed to the rest of this stuff. So,
Right. The rest of it, which as Calvin would say, is the pure unvarnished truth.
right. And then there's one strip where Calvin is talking to Hobbes, and this was also left to our imaginations. We don't know what happened, but he says he really got in trouble at school. And Hobbes asks if it has anything to do with all those sirens around noon. And Calvin says, I said I don't want to talk about it. So no noodles mentioned, but we don't know what it was.
That's
And
true.
given the apparent severity of the noodle incident, it seems like those two things being connected would make sense. Now, I'll
Yeah.
also point out in the previous strip, he says that today he's going for the gusto and he puts on like a helmet. He's like, every day it's the same old thing, but not today. Today I go for the gusto. And he puts on this kind of motorcycle helmet. It's kind of like the commander hat from Yukon Ho and
Yeah.
a cape. And Hobbs is like, I think you should ask your mom if it's okay. So maybe that involved going for the gusto and that got him sent home and there were sirens around noon. That's all possibilities.
Yes, possible, but we can't prove anything. So it may or may not be related to the noodle incident.
Yeah. And that's pretty much all the information we have. So I'll ask again, do you have any thoughts on what the noodle incident might have been?
Man, so this was a little harder to imagine than Hamster Huey.
Yeah.
Um, Now you mentioned before, like kids may have access to noodles of various kinds in school. So yeah, I was thinking maybe there was some kind of like macaroni art project, and then he somehow did something to disrupt this. It's a possibility. He could have had some cooked noodles of a certain kind. I don't know. I actually find this one harder to imagine what it might have been than some of the others, which again maybe is part of why that was such a good choice of items for it to revolve around. But
Yeah, what in the world could he have done with noodles that would be that bad?
yeah, so I mean, maybe my best stab would be something where, like, maybe if noodles are being served in the cafeteria and Calvin does something to make them seem gross or like gross out anyone who's going to eat them somehow. That's that's maybe my best stab at what it might have been. How about you?
Yeah, well, and it would have to be again in a way that no one can prove that it was Calvin. So it has to be like he left them somewhere in a way that looks gross,
Mhm.
without getting into details, partly because I don't have any and partly because it'd be gross in the bathroom or something. Um,
Yeah,
so, who knows what specifically it could be, but yeah, the idea of it being something that grosses people out, maybe causes people to throw up or something, and so that sets off a chain of events. But we still call it the noodle incident because that was the inciting
right.
incident.
Yeah, and I don't think he would do something like, try to, for lack of a better word, like taint them somehow. Because Calvin doesn't seem like he wants to actually cause harm to people, but he would, like the idea of grossing out people. We see him do that.
Oh
So,
yeah,
but
he invents a game.
yeah, so I don't think it would be like something you'd think could be criminal, despite what we said about sirens a second ago. But yeah,
Yeah,
I could imagine, like you were saying, like he does something, leaves them somewhere, or does something to some noodles, which grosses out everyone in the cafeteria or something.
yeah, maybe the sirens are an ambulance because a kid fainted or something. So yeah. Anyway, listeners, what do you think happens in Hamster Huey? What do you think the noodle incident is? And we didn't talk about, but what do you think the salamander incident might have been? I
That's
I
fair.
assume that one's letting a salamander loose somewhere, but
Yeah, which would track with things Calvin does on other occasions, usually by accident, it seems, but because we know there's the time where it's like, for show and tell, I brought something amazing. This little guy can, he kind of looks around, there's a hole in the bag or something. You've all had your shots, right? So
I suppose that could have been the salamander, although I don't think salamanders are usually known for causing problems that would require you to have had your shots. So
yeah, I don't think so either. I mean, possibly Calvin wouldn't know that, but it seems
that's true.
weird that he would assume that it would need that if he didn't have some reason to think so. So
Yeah. So yeah, it makes sense that it would be though that he released a salamander somewhere because and it's consistent with also keeping live worms in his dad's something or keeping frogs in the toilet. So,
Right. Or what seems to be some kind of bug in his mom's clothes of some kind. Because
yeah.
one where he's like,
Also,
when you got dressed today, did you feel anything weird, like
yeah, yeah.
tickly or stingy?
Also, I will point out this only just now occurred to me, but the salamander incident may not have happened at school. We're not told where that one happened. So
That's true.
that could have been him getting in trouble with his parents.
Or maybe even some other occasion or at some other site. Like we know he gets in trouble at the grocery store at least once. He gets a funny look at the art museum. He apparently has bitten people at the Natural History Museum. So we know that there are other places besides home and school that Calvin has done things to get in trouble or, mess with other people somehow.
Right. Yeah. So we know the noodle incident happened at school. That much is told to us, but the salamander incident could have been anywhere. So
That's true.
again, listeners, what do you think? Where was the salamander incident? What was it?
Yeah,
And
so salamanders, hamsters, and noodles.
oh my.
Oh
And
my.
with that, we'll wrap it up. So thanks for tuning in. As always, you can email us at magiccandh@proton.me about your ideas in response to this episode, about anything else. In particular, if you have trivia questions you want us to answer, please send us those. And we would love to hear from you, whatever it is that you have to say.
That's right. And remember, this is a completely free podcast and a completely ad-free podcast. So whether you're emailing us about trivia or whatever episode we're talking about, or just a listener, whether you email us or not, we're glad to have you and come along and enjoy this comic strip with us.
Absolutely. Come along. Let's go exploring. You've been listening to The Magic of Calvin and Hobbes, a fan celebration. We'll be releasing 40 episodes all throughout the year, from November 18th, 2025 to November 18th, 2026, to celebrate the 40th anniversary. Our intro and outro music is Tchaikovsky's 1812 Overture, referenced in the Calvin and Hobbes strip published on October 8, 1986. This rendition was performed by the Skidmore College Orchestra and made available under a Creative Commons license on museopen.com. We hope you'll join us next episode for more fun.